Are unicorns real? Uh, well, from my experience, yes, they are. What I would say is that anything that our human collective has put an extreme amount of energy into is real because as co creators, we create based on the energy we put out. And everything in that matter, everything in that space when it comes to mythology, folklore, all of that is real because of that. Now, I do believe unicorns are real and existed long before the mythology of man and all that type of thing. Um, but it's kind of like a lot of people equate them to stories, to fictions. And even as a writer of my own fiction stories, I know internally my fiction stories are not fictions. They are windows into other universes, timelines, pasts, futures, other worlds, wherever they exist. And as I write them, they exist in a way that I can access them and see what's going on. This is why a lot of writers of fiction often talk about that they might have put an outline together, they might have done some planning for the story, but when they start writing, the characters take on a life of their own. That's the key phrase. The characters take on a life of their own. And it's not because or it's because the writer is not creating that from their mind. It's because they do have a life of their own. One of the ways I often describe it too is because I don't fully understand. Like one of my stories, I've always felt I wrote a future version of life 1,000 years in the future, and I was peering in and seeing the story. It's a fiction story I wrote called Frozen, part of the Fae Awakening series that I wrote and am working on. And that one always felt like I was seeing into the future. Now, the main series I wrote, it always felt like I was seeing into a present somewhere. And it's like looking into this space and you just see everything happening like watching a movie. And if you just let it be, if you're intuitive and just try not to force things, just let it be, the movie will play out because those things are happening somewhere, often in like a pocket dimension. Now, this video is supposed to be about unicorns, so I don't know where I'm going with this exactly, other than I know I was supposed to talk about this topic potentially in a different video, but obviously they're getting mashed together, which is probably has a purpose for the people who are listening. So, if you've ever seen The Magicians, if you've seen, I mean, Alice in Wonderland would be probably be a good one. Um, uh, the Page Master comes to mind, which is a really old Macaulay Culkin animated film where he goes into the books. Um, Trying to think of some other modern day movies that people would resonate with. Narnia is a good one. I just read the first Narnia book. I haven't read it since I was in, I mean, the last time I read the Narnia books is the first time I read them, which would have been back in uh, sixth grade. So, what, 1995 ish? Uh, and in the first Narnia books, Narnia is created out of nothingness. They go into, spoiler alert, Narnia is 30 plus years old, or not 30 plus years old. Narnia is, I don't know when he wrote it, 50s, 60s, something like that, maybe longer. Um, they go through a portal and there's nothingness and there's a lion, and the lion creates Narnia. The point is that all of our fictions even the fictions of beings that we call fictions, mythologies, folklore, they have so much energy around them that it's not a question of are they real? It's a question of where are they real? Where do they exist? Can you interact with them? And as a writer, I see this because I have created uh, pocket dimensions. I've always felt that some of my stories create, the ones that are truly fictions, create sparks of energy. And a spark of energy creates a little bit more, and the more energy I put into it, the more that story comes to life. And the more energy I put into that, the more and more it comes to life and grows and sustains itself and develops. And so if you are writing, and I'm not a pantser. Well, a pantser is somebody who just sits down and writes a story. The Stephen King and others do this, where they just write, and they never really figure things out. Uh, and you can kind of tell because the stories, they have a lot of filler, they have a lot of repeat stuff. The endings aren't the greatest and kind of seem to just blur and drop off, because the initial stage of planning to build the universe was skipped. And it's not bad. There are a lot of good stories out there like that, but the initial planning stages, that is putting energy into that spark, into that space, into that space-time existence for something to be birthed, which is why a lot of writers say, I was working on this, I planned it, here's the outline, here's everything that was going on. It took a life of its own and developed into its own. The characters did their own things. It's like I was watching them do it. Uh, when I write my fiction stories, I have a thing, I have a loose plan, and the characters will tell me no. And it's almost like you're connecting into another world, and intuitively you can feel them into their mind and feel them saying, no, this is what I'm doing. Almost like you're a guide, almost like you're a guide, almost like you're the higher energy looking in, and you're watching them make their choices, and you set up the base, the roles of the universe, the roles of that pocket dimension, that space and time. You set up that existence, but then once it's rolling, it just goes. And so all these beings that we have, I'm going to do a video at some point on several different versions of them, but Santa is one that people are like, you know, the the energy around Santa and all of that. But does he truly exist is the question. And anything we put an extreme amount of collective energy into exists, because we create it with our energy. We create it by putting energy into it. And then the question just becomes, where do they exist? And do they exist in the way that we understand them to exist? So, what's my point? Unicorns exist. They are real. They are uh, beings you can connect with. They are higher dimensional beings. Um, and all those stories and fairy tales you heard as a kid, they exist within a certain space time, given how much energy is put into them. So, like, my stories exist in a very small, limited space of space time, unless they really are their own universe, which I don't like I said, I don't fully understand it, but I feel like a lot of this stuff is possibly pocket dimensions or just accessing other universes and seeing things play out in other timelines. And that one of them I've always felt is another timeline, or a future timeline. And I also know this too because I have a being who came to me, a human who came to me from another dimension, a parallel dimension to ours that's running alongside ours, that has a very negative timeline. And I'm going to be writing a story at some point about this space, and it will be perceived by many to be a fiction, but it's not. It's not a fiction. It's a story written about them to give conscious awareness to people and be entertaining at the same time because people escape through story. But it's actually me looking into that dimension and these people telling me what's going on and telling me what to write and showing me the events that have happened. So a lot of fiction is not fiction. It's not fake. It's people accessing things they don't understand because they are not consciously aware. And I'll say that about creatives all the time, artists, writers, whoever they are. They access things they do not understand and feel they are making a fiction on a piece of paper or in a script or a book, when actually what's happening in their mind, they're remote viewing, they're astral traveling, they're being given downloads, all that type of thing. They're remembering past lives, which are happening at the same time. So all that stuff exists, everything. And some of it exists, in the case of a pocket dimension, it exists as a spark. But then when you get more people to believe in it over time, more and more people to believe into it, that energy grows because more people are putting energy into its existence and co-creating in this universe. This universe is about co-creation. It's about putting energy into stuff and the collective deciding what is created in the universe. So anything you've read that you're like, does that exist? You don't even have to ask the question, does it exist? All you have to understand is where, when, what is it really? Because it does exist. It's just, can you access it now type of thing? Is it in our current time, our current space-time reality? Or is it part of the future, part of the past, part of a parallel universe, part of another universe, existence, pocket dimension, all that type of stuff? For some reason, they wanted me to add that in about unicorns. I was going to do that as a separate video, like I said, but I started off planning to talk about unicorns, and that's what come up. So that meshes into the idea of unicorns, because when we think about unicorns, to give you a little bit of the background, first of all, a unicorn, for those who don't know the word, I think most English speakers are going to know the word, but if you don't know English, you might not know that word. And it's a horse with a horn, a single horn, usually white. In the mythology, it's very rarely, very rarely given anything other than a white color because they're symbols of purity. And they are typically horses. Now, there's mythology out there about them being potentially other things, but typically, stereotypically, what people think of is a white horse with a single horn, usually like a spirally type of horn, but going straight to a point. Like braided, not spiral, but like a horn that has a little bit of a braid to it, going straight to a point. And then you get more modern media where they start introducing colors and other types of things, but that's a lot of Hollywood era type stuff. The original mythology, and I don't even know if it's original, I just know it's mythology from, medieval times and when all of this supposedly started. This is the era of knights and people with armor and swords, and that unicorns were very prized, and they were seen as extremely aggressive. They were seen as extremely strong and difficult to kill. Very large animals, and there was only one way to essentially kill them, and they wanted to kill them for the horn because the horn had magical properties and all kinds of um, superstition around around it that was created because they were seen as magical. So knights would go into the woods and try to hunt these animals, and they could not uh, bring them down or kill them, so to speak, but they figured out one method was to take a virgin, a woman who was a virgin, pure, innocent, uh, hadn't been tainted, I guess is the word, sexually, because there was purity back then meant you weren't sexually active in any way. Back in those days, it was all about chastity and all this stuff. So they would take a virgin into the woods, and they would set her below a tree, and they would wait. And what would happen is the unicorns could sense the purity, and the unicorns would walk up, and they would kneel down, and basically, like any animal who's comfortable, they would get comfortable, and she'd pet them or all that other stuff, and then the knight would jump out of nowhere and kill it. Um, so the knight would do that, and they get their horn, and that's kind of the basis for the story, for the mythology of the unicorn. Now, throughout time, unicorns are mentioned. You have the mention in the Bible, but you could argue whether it is a unicorn or not, like a horse with a magical horn, because the idea of a unicorn means one horn, single horn. So there's some argument from people who do unicorn research about whether the translations of the Bible that have that word are actually referring to things like goats and rhinoceroses and ox and all this other stuff. But you can say the word is there, but at the same time, is it the horse? Then you have Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan, you know, the he was a uh, not I don't want to say he was a monarch, basically a monarch, but he was a what's the word? Um, I can't think of the word for some reason. The human word's not coming to me. He was in charge of enormous armies. He conquered tons of land in Asia and all around, and created enormous empire. Created an enormous empire. A lot of people historically say that empire was like he was a very bloody tyrant. That's the word. He was a very bloody tyrant. Came through, marched through these villages, killed everybody, conquered the land, and made it his, and all that. That's the typical story. I have seen that there's some debate now that we're seeing the truth of different histories revealed, that there's some debate as to whether that was the truth or whether the story was just kind of twisted. And I'm not sure entirely myself, because when you feel into that type of stuff, no tyrant, no dictator, no emperor, anybody in that space, none of them actually believe or feel they're evil. They all think they're doing what's best for the people and for them. They just don't have a pleasant way of going about it because of egos and all this other stuff. So they become, those words, tyrants, dictators, all that. So whether the truth is that it was a benevolent one or a malevolent one, we'll never know, because we weren't there until true history is brought down. And of course, those who can access the Akashic, which we can all access. But if you can access the Akashic, you can see that Um, and there are timelines where there are multiple timelines too. But I'm getting off track. There are multiple timelines where, in one he'd be benevolent and one he'd be malevolent. But we're getting off track. So let's get back to unicorns. When it comes to unicorns, he was conquering all this land in Asia. And he went to India, and India is the one piece of land that, to my knowledge, he never touched. He never marched on, he left it alone. And the story goes that he came over the Himalayas with his army, and like the sun was coming up or something. And in the distance, he was getting ready to march into India, and they saw a unicorn. And he took that as a sign from one of his passed on family members and was like, I'm not going to march into India. I'm not going to march on the land of Buddha. I'm going to leave it alone because it was a sign that if he did, disastrous things would happen. So he left it alone and he like conquered everything else around it. So that's another unicorn story. And then the other interesting one, which uh, is kind of about how you can be tricked a little bit. Not a little bit, they're tricked a lot. In Denmark, the royals in, I think it's Denmark anyway, the royals have a chair made out of unicorn horns. The entire chair is made out of these giant horns, kind of put together, and it almost looks like something Game of Thrones, I guess, but it's white. It's just unicorn horns. What they didn't know is that at the time they were making this, the people who were selling them the unicorn horns and telling them the tales of the unicorns were actually going out and killing narwhals. Now, narwhals are a whale that has a horn protruding from its front. So, narwhals have a horn, and it looks like if you cut it off, it looks like a unicorn horn. So they were selling those for high prices, going and killing them off. And then royalty and rich people were using them to build things, and they built this chair that you can still see. You can Google it on Wikipedia and see images of it. Now, here's the interesting thing. A lot throughout history, a lot of things are confused as unicorns because you have like, first of all, you have goats. The Genghis Khan thing, there's ideas out there that when he came up, there's a certain type of goat, or I think it's like a mountain goat type thing that lives in the Himalayas. And if you were to turn its head just right, it would look like it had a single horn. And so that he probably saw that. You could argue that. Now, those of us who are awake also know he could have been seeing a damn unicorn sitting right there. And, it could also be that he was seeing it and not too many other people were, depending on how connected he was to other worlds. So, the other thing that I'm thinking of in the moment here is unicorns are, from my knowledge and experience with them, are of a higher vibrational plane of existence that exists in the sky. Um, that does not mean they are in the sky flying around. It means that their layer, so I'm closer to sea level. My layer is down here. Their layer is up here. And when you align to their layer, it's like laying pieces of paper on top of each other or looking at the layers of an onion. When you align to their layer, meaning if you go higher physically, you can access some of those higher sky layers because you're higher and more in line. Like if the paper's stacked and you take you go through the paper and come up here, you stack a mountain, and it's like all around you have a mountain poking out, but the layers are still in the same spot. You can access those different spots. So think about that for a second. If he came over into India and they were in the Himalayas, which are some of the, they have Mount Everest, the highest mountain in the world, and all this other stuff, all these other high mountains up there, depending how high they are, maybe they really were seeing into that space-time dimensional plane of existence where these beings exist. And that's kind of even recently when I was talking about like where do you exist, and they're like higher dimensional plane of existence, and that's what they show me. Like, if you're on a sea floor, you're not going to easily peer into that space of their level of ground. But if you're on a mountain, and it doesn't have to be like a high mountain, it could probably be Appalachia high. But if you're on a mountain, you're going to be able to more easily see into some of those spaces. So imagine he actually saw a unicorn. Now, getting back to my point with the goats, you have goats that have horns, you have rhinoceroses, you have um, uh, I'm drawing a blank here for some reason. There's a lot of animals that do have horns, oxes, rams, all this stuff, but single horns. And then you have this narwhal that has a horn. It's unlike any other whale out there. It's kind of like, I call it like the platypus conundrum. You have the platypus. The platypus it's a mammal. Mammals aren't like, mammals are supposed to be like live birth type things. It's a mammal, but it has a duck bill. It gives, it lays eggs. It's a mammal, it has a duck bill, lays eggs. It has a toe on it that is venomous, like a claw that has venom in it. And then it has this fur that appears in like if you use a black light on it, it shines up, it lights up. So I'm always that was always my proof of ancient civilizations playing genetic hybrids. But if you have a platypus, it's the craziest thing, doesn't make any sense on this earth. And then you have a whale that has a horn, and there's nothing in the water that really is an example of that. In the water, you have all kinds of these examples on land. What if the unicorns of our world were just killed off long, long ago? What if the stories of them killing unicorns were a truth of existence, or that there were portals opening? And my feeling is it's more that there was a time where the barriers between worlds weren't as uh, separate, and beings were coming and going, but then humans decided, let's kill all this stuff off. And doing it because they want the superstitions. The unicorn horn has magic to it. So you get this wondering of, did they really exist? Was there really a physical animal here with a horn? And there are some prehistoric stuff that they're like, oh, there's these horses and all this other stuff going on. But was there an animal here that humans did kill off? And that's why the stories of them killing unicorns exist. That they weren't, the stories aren't actually mythology. They're not fake. They're just telling, maybe in a less than true way, they're telling this story of these animals existed through like the medieval storytelling. And here's where it gets interesting. Unicorns do exist. Be very clear about that. They do. I've seen two mice. I think I've seen two, maybe three, but I want to. I'm positive. I know I'm positive I've seen two. And the third one might have been more telepathically. Now, when I say that, I've seen a brown shaggy one, and so that was the first one I ever saw. I saw a brown shaggy one in this forest. I was traveling, not physically traveling. I was traveling, like astrally. Saw a brown shaggy one in this forest, and it had a horn, and I knew, I was like, that's a unicorn, but it doesn't match any of the storytelling that I knew because I had been studying a lot of mythology at the time. And they told me, they're like, throw that out the window. Um, but that the mythology kind of exists for a reason. So the first one I saw was brown and shaggy. The second one I saw in the woods. I don't remember where I was at, but it was a white one. It was a white standard unicorn. And then I have seen other ones telepathically and spoken with them. And I even have them from that very, 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 very high dimensional space speaking to me now because I'm connected to them. But they've spoken to me through client readings. And when I say that, a lot of people get excited. They're like, "Ooh, we might have a unicorn around," because a lot of people want a unicorn around them because there's a fascination and beauty with that, especially for people from from childhood, people who watch these cartoons and stories growing up about unicorns. I've worked with hundreds of people. Very, very few people have a unicorn around, and most of them are not capable of speaking to it. Um, they're they're very high vibrational, and those who do have them around are often told they're not ready to, like, that you have work to do to be able to speak to them. There's also this sense of purity that the people who are around them, it's either they picked them up as a child because they were so pure of heart that the unicorn energies were able to connect with them, or that they have these what people call star seed lives. Uh, Star seed lives are usually equated to galactic lives, but it's just past life. I say past lives, and it can be galactic, which is the primary definition. Uh, but when I do them, it's past lives of all realms, places of existence in the universe, spaces, and times, past, present, future. And so a lot of these people are connected through past lives with them and have, there was one woman recently who had uh, three. I was shocked. She asked me a question on a podcast, and I was shocked to hear her story. And she just asked, she's like, are they around? Can you verify that? And I tapped in, and there were three, and I couldn't believe it. And they were like, it was a connection of a past life existence, and you could tell within her energy she had that uh, childlike, bright, hopeful, peaceful, like a magical energy. There's a very magical energy to it. So I've connected to them in that way too, but very, very few, very, very few. Um, there for a long time, I was just told by my guides they're real, until 3, 4 years ago, where I saw the brown shaggy one, and it took me another 2 years before I saw a white one. And so I know they're real from another dimensional space, but there's a lot of, if you want to work with them, you have to raise your vibration. You have to be of a higher vibration, pure. There's a strong emphasis on purity, which is why the stories, if we take that back to the stories now, you have these medieval stories of them killing unicorns by bringing out pure humans, what they assumed were pure humans, virgins, beautiful women, taking them into the woods, leaving them there, and then the unicorns would come up and peacefully interact with those. Now, if you think about these stories from a vibrational sense, if a soldier walked into the woods, this is like when I talk about Sasquatch in my videos and others. If a warrior who is unconscious, who is low vibrational, walks into the woods, and there is a being there of high vibration, they are going to be, or seem, I should say, seem, they are going to seem aggressive because they're not going to want you there. So they're going to try to figure out ways to get you away from their high vibrational space so your vibration does not bring down their home. So you could take those stories and go, what if they were real? Because that's the way vibration works. That's the way these beings work. The whole reason Sasquatches, for example, um, come at people, from what they've explained to me, is not because they're aggressive. It's because of vibrational issues and other things. They don't want you there. So what if the aggressiveness was actually told through story as being, oh, there's these aggressive, mean horses in the woods and we have to kill them all? What if that was just them reacting to or to low vibrational humans? So then you have this dynamic of, it's very possible they were physically here at some point, crossing through. I don't know if they were physically here in the sense that they existed uh, naturally. Um, I feel like every time I think about it, I see in my mind this portal in a mountain, and like them coming out of it and crossing into other worlds and exploring, just like any other being would who was highly conscious and intelligent, exploring, and some of them seeding and living here, but not actually being of this space. And so, what if they were just like dragons likely were? Um, that's a story for another day, but dragons likely were physically here and killed off. But what if they were, and um, humans just killed them off? Because when you look around nature, you have a whale that has a horn just like that. You have rhinoceroses, but it's like a cow with a horn growing out of its nose, right? In multiple, like, they have the multiple little stumps for some of them. You have the platypus, which doesn't have a horn, but it's like, where the hell did that thing come from? So there are multiple reasons that these things could have come into existence. But what if that story, if you take the stories of the old and match it to what we know now about consciousness and these other beings, like Sasquatches and how they interact, what if humans were just in a space and time and the unicorns came out, were physically present, and they killed them off? That would be cause for these beings to go back through the portal to their higher dimensional space and not connect with humans anymore. If you had an unsafe place, they would retreat, go back to their plane of existence, and then just quantumly, through telepathy, astral travel, connect with us in that way until there was a time that it was safe again. So I feel like that's my unicorn story right now, my unicorn conundrum, you might say, in some ways, to just get you thinking about some of these different things, because you're going to find out that some of those old stories have truth to them. In that regard, it just keeps flashing in my mind, so I'm going to say it. It doesn't necessarily tie into this topic, but there are paintings in the 1600s of dinosaurs. Be very clear, like, there are paintings from the 1600s of dinosaurs, and um, other stories I can get into that are mass market fictions from 200-300 years ago that talk about different animals that have always resonated to me as, like, it just seems like it's not fiction type of thing. And so I feel like the more we learn about the truth of our world, the more we're going to find out humans have done some pretty damning things, in that some of these stories have truth to them, but not in the way the stories told, which we're all aware of as we wake up. So the truth being, knights existed, unicorns existed, purity existed, and chances are it wasn't a virgin they were taking out. That's probably a twist of the story. Unicorns are attracted to pure vibration, purity. They were probably in those instances taking children out. Um, it's pure vibration, pure innocence. And just because somebody's a virgin, even though that's how they equated it back in the day, that does not mean they were of pure vibration. So chances are it was probably children that they were like, hey, go walk through the woods and then we're going to trap these beings. So just think about that. It's a possibility. I don't know if it's a for sure thing. Um, I know they exist. I know they're around clients that I've experienced them, and they exist in a different space time dimension, higher vibrational dimension, very, very high vibrational. And this is why a lot of people can't access them. A lot of people are capped vibrationally. So it's why you often find people like a lot of when people were low vibrational, people were seeing fairies. It was always fairies they were talking about in the stories. Well, it's because to access really, really, really high vibrations, you have to be very high vibrational yourself and have all the chakras open and be able to access higher, 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 higher chakras. And whenever I tap into unicorns, they're way, 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 way up, just like angels. Angels are way, way, way up. You can feel you're accessing them through those higher dimensions, which is why a lot of people won't necessarily experience them, even if they're around. You'll experience them through signs, symbols, intuitive nudges, all that other stuff. Dreams. Dreams are big. So they're real. They're a being that just exists in a different space. And the question is now, are they real, or does all of that storytelling actually tell a truth in a slightly twisted way, but that they had physically been in this space at one time? The more I feel into it, the more that's what I feel. The more I feel like I just keep seeing this portal in a mountain, them coming through, and that doesn't mean it's a single mountain or anything. It's a representation, an analogy for my guides to explain it to me. And these beings walking out into this earth and going, oh, we love it, it's beautiful here, we're going to stay. And then they encounter these violent humans, and a bunch of them get killed off because they are extremely peaceful. They're extremely peaceful. I don't even know how to explain it. They are some of the purest beings of the heart space that you will encounter, I guess is the way to explain it. Some of the purest vibrations, purest heart, purest intentions, which is also why they are attracted to purity, innocence, children, typically, who have not been shifted out of that. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm grateful for every one of you, and I love you all.